Master, we are preparing for your arrival.
Oh, Master, we are preparing for your arrival.
For you are the Prince of Darkness.
For you are the Prince of Darkness.
1984 brought us Bloodbath at the House of Death. This one is directed and co-written by Ray Cameron and stars Vincent Price, at least in a supporting role. But the real star of the show here is a name you may not have heard of before. That name being Kenny Everett. Now, Kenny Everett started his career as a radio DJ, and in the kind of the early sort of 80s and late 70s, he kind of transitioned into kind of TV, doing kind of various kind of sketch shows and comedy shows. I was a massive fan of Kenny Everett when I was a kid. Somewhat kind of edgy humour for the time, quite adult, pushing the boundaries, you know, back in the kind of the early 80s and stuff like that when I kind of started watching him. I really enjoyed his kind of sketch work, lots of kind of crazy kind of characters he did. And this was his one and only movie role. And it's kind of like almost like a somewhat more adult version of a Carry On film, if you're familiar with that type of thing. Now, the movie was marketed outside of the UK with Vincent Price as the kind of the face of it, because Kenny Everett really wasn't known in anywhere other than in the UK. But here he was kind of quite the kind of the superstar at the time. Although, obviously, that kind of time is now past, and I shouldn't imagine many people younger than me really know who he was. But at the time, he was kind of like, you know, quite big in the UK. The story focuses on 8 scientists as they are sent to investigate this particular cursed mansion, so to speak. And this mansion has seen its fair share of tragedy. A decade or so prior to our story taking place, there was a massacre where 18 people were murdered, and ever since then there's been kind of strange radio activity coming from this particular property. So we have this kind of group of various different kind of scientists going checking out this property and see what's up. And then may well be this strange cult, perhaps led by Vincent Price's character, that surrounds this property, that have nefarious means and various kind of intent. What'll happen? You have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's talk about what I liked. Now, I actually saw this movie back when I was a kid. I was a huge fan of Kenny Everett, as I mentioned, and I wanted to watch this film. And I saw it and I was thoroughly disappointed because I just didn't find it funny. I liked Kenny Everett's sketch shows, but at the time when I was a nipper, didn't really find this funny at all, to be honest. So, watching it again now as an adult, did I find it worked any better? Honestly, not really. This was a difficult film to watch, to be honest. We are supposed to be talking about the positives, so we will talk about some. There are some funny jokes in here, and it is more or less a parody, to be honest. With kind of the humour being somewhat kind of broad, maybe too broad for some. And there are some risque moments in it, but not probably to the degree that was to be expected if you are familiar with the kind of the Kenny Everett sketch work. There's a little bit here and there. The humour reminds me a lot of the Carry On films, as I've said, and that might be appealing to some. So if you like that kind of slapsticky parody kind of style humour with maybe a little bit of a taste of edginess here or there, then you may well like it. But there are a couple of jokes that I do find funny, and there are a few kind of like pokes at kind of horror films, for example. You know, we've got someone kind of peering through the bushes, you know, from like a camera POV shot, and then the kind of the bush flicks back and hits the camera in the face, and you go, you hear someone go, oh, making a noise, or there's someone kind of, you hear the kind of the Jaws thing creeping up, and someone's walking along a corridor, and he opens the door, and there's Kenny Everett playing like a double bass with the Jaws thing, things like that. So there are a couple of jokes that I feel kind of do work and are quite genuinely funny. Kenny Everett, I feel, is always quite interesting to watch. I mean, maybe you have to have somewhat of a nostalgia if you're familiar with him as a kind of a personality, but I always find him you know, quite personable kind of character to watch. Even though this movie, in all honesty, is a little dull. Again, we'll talk about that. There are quite a lot of recognisable faces here, particularly if you're, again, kind of my sort of age and from the UK. Again, maybe not so much from if you're outside of the UK, with the exception of kind of Vincent Price. Vincent Price looks like he's having an absolute whale of a time, although he's not in the movie a hell of a lot, to be honest. And the movie, I would say, in its third act gets a little darker, with a little bit more kind of like the more classic kind of horror elements coming into play in the third act. But let's be honest. Let's talk about what doesn't work. This movie really, I didn't like it when I was a kid, and I was a fan of Kenny Everett, and I don't like it now. The movie is dull. It is dull as dishwater, unfortunately, with jokes being way overplayed, some of them kind of being repeated, some of them just being not funny. Okay, this wasn't written by Kenny Everett, who did write a lot of his own kind of stuff. So, although I'm sure some of it was possibly improv, it hasn't got that kind of like that hilarity, at least in my opinion, that Kenny Everett's kind of like sketch shows had and things like that. There are elements here and there, but ultimately the jokes fall flat a lot of the time. And as I said, some of them just seem overplayed. Scenes drag on forever, with kind of a lot of the time just dragging the joke out for far longer than it needs to be. And even when it's not trying to be funny, scenes again just seem to just go on and on and on. The plot is kind of, you know, obviously it's a horror comedy. You can't really say, oh, you know, is it going to be an engaging plot? It isn't an engaging plot. Even for a horror comedy, it's not particularly interesting, and it kind of spins its wheels. And the Vincent Price character, as I say, is massively underused, and really doesn't have much interaction with our main kind of cast. Feels somewhat wasted. I'm assuming that he was obviously only on set for a kind of short period of time. But they could have been more done with it. The horror elements, unfortunately, are too light. It gets a little darker in the third act, as I say, but even then, it's not really. It never really goes into kind of a real horror. Really, just a very kind of light. As you know, we've seen Carry On, Screaming, or Bob Hope Meets the Wolfman. Things like that is kind of just only a scooch a little bit more adult than those kind of things. So really not much to say for kind of for genuine horror fans, and it being quite disappointing in that. It's very cheap looking as well. Yes, again, it's a low budget kind of British horror comedy, but there are some kind of like props and things that, again, it's somewhat of a comedy, so you kind of give it some leeway, but nonetheless, it's just a little bit too silly, and it's just boring. Unfortunately, the biggest sin of this movie, it is boring. The story's not interesting. The characters are not particularly engaging. Some of them are massively kind of shortchanged in regards to kind of screen time. Not just Vincent Price, but some of the other sort of scientists as well. I feel are just kind of not a lot is done with them. And some of them, we have this scene, for example, in a kitchen with two of the kind of the younger scientists that just seems to go on forever. It's just not an interesting film. A few of the jokes land, but unfortunately, this is not the legacy that that Kenny Everett would ideally leave, I suppose. And this was his one and only kind of movie role, but he did have lots of kind of TV stuff, which obviously is, in my opinion, a lot better at least. For me, this was a real kind of like swing and a miss, and me as a child, me as an adult, don't like this movie, to be honest. It's a 3 out of 10. Boring, unfunny, and uninspired. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.